It was a warm June evening. The men in the garage were going out for a beer. One of them had brought a salted fish and was about to treat the company to some. Henry was walking home from work, tired, but he responded to his buddy's call and sat down on the edge of the bench. He was in a lousy mood, and he didn't feel like going home. He had a few drinks with the guys first, then went back to the shop and bought a couple more beers. The guys had already left, and it was quiet and empty behind the garages. Henry sat down on the bench and opened the lid on the edge of the table and sipped. "It's a lousy day, and so is the mood," Henry thought to himself, and took another sip. Today is the birthday of his brother, his only sibling, but he won't congratulate him or celebrate him because his brother is in prison. It's Henry's fault. Henry can't forget this for a minute. It's a burden that eats away at him, poisoning every day he lives out there. Miles has always been his protector, his best big brother. Throughout high school, Henry never knew trouble, even though he was shy and weak. And Miles grew up to be an athletic beauty. He was captain of the boys' soccer team, did a little martial arts, and lifted his dad's weights 5 times with his left hand and 5 times with his right hand every morning. Miles was the star of the school. For all his athletic accomplishments, he was also a good student, a straight A student in all subjects, even physics and history. He got straight A's in all subjects except art. He didn't like drawing as a child. He simply refused. "They drew everything perfectly well without me. What's not enough for you, Raphael and Michelangelo? I can't even draw a black square. What do I need it for?" "I like to watch more," said Miles. And he really didn't miss any opportunity to admire paintings to go to any exhibition, especially when he met Vivian in his first year at university. She also started taking him to concerts. Henry had been jealous of his brother since childhood, of his older brother and prettier, taller, and stronger, of his muscles and broad shoulders, unlike the frail, skinny Henry, whom no one paid any attention to, especially the girls. And when Miles introduced his younger brother to the beautiful Vivian, he became envious. "My brother's lucky. He fell in love with such a beautiful girl, as if she were Venus herself from Botticelli's painting. As gentle and light as a Greek goddess of love. It was not for nothing that my brother admired those paintings, and he picked a bride just to order," Henry thought. Vivian was also modest. As if unaware of her classic beauty, she didn't have the arrogance inherent in almost every beautiful girl. They were such a striking couple. Passers-by on the street would turn on them, and it was unclear which of the pair interested people more. Either the gentle blonde Vivian or the seemingly handsome Miles, and Henry was left to stare enviously at his brother's chosen one. But my younger brother was the most successful academically. Power sports didn't suit him, so he would excel at chess, beat everyone and win, and he had no equal in the exact sciences. He participated in all kinds of Olympiads, taking only first places. Teachers had already heard about the talented young man, but except for scientific achievements, Henry boasted with nothing else. He was of interest only to teachers, but not to classmates, and certainly not to girls, and his brother's happiness hurt his eyes. Especially Henry, from the first minute he met her, was head over heels in love with his brother's girl. He wasn't just jealous of Miles. He was hurt and jealous and tormented and couldn't help it. She paid no attention to him. It was as if he was nothing to her. Did not exist in her frame of reference. There was only room for Miles, the beautiful and irresistible. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice their little brother's gaze, or even his gaze at all, so it seemed to him. And after a few years, he is absolutely sure that this was the case. Even though Miles and Vivian always took him with them everywhere, to an art show with the 3 of them, to a concert with the 3 of them, to a disco with the 3 of them, to some friends' birthdays, they always went with just the 3 of them. But it hurt Henry to see them together all the time, but his brother didn't understand or didn't want to understand it. Anyway, he would take no for an answer and dragged his little brother everywhere. "You'll see how many girls are there. You'll pick one for sure," he said, and dragged Henry to another party. But he didn't want any. He only wanted Vivian. She was the only one and no one else, or rather, He was the only one no girl wanted or was interested in, and that made it all the more painful. And his brother's happiness was even more hateful. Even now, just thinking about those times made his hands sting harder under the cold, dark glass. He sipped again, but he didn't hurry home. Even though the same Vivian, so desirable, so inaccessible, unattainable, was waiting for him there. And now his wife, Henry, gulped down the rest of his beer from the bottle. "It's time to go home. I'll have another drink at home. Or should I stay longer? I don't want to go to the apartment and see her face and hair and body," Henry thought to himself. But here it's easier not to think about how they got into his life. How his whole life almost went down the drain. He'd been drinking heavily at one of those parties, wanting to get away. Miles was sober, and so was Vivian. They had literally had one drink each. Still, Miles didn't want to drive home now. He was planning on getting behind the wheel of his dad's car again. As an athlete, he tried not to take alcohol at all, and if he did have a drink, he never got behind the wheel. That was when he urged Henry to stay, hang out with the boys for a while longer, and then they would call a cab and get home in peace. He would pick up the car in the morning, but it infuriated Henry to see Miles and Vivian kissing, not chastely and gently, but passionately and maturely. He couldn't take it anymore. Jealously tormenting him, angry, burning jealousy and anger. They added more fuel to the fire. The boys noticed them kissing too and began teasing Miles about the wedding, especially since everyone had thought they were a couple for a long time and could see that it was on the way. So Miles gathered everyone around, demanded silence, and loudly announced that he had already proposed to Vivian, and she said yes. They had already filed the marriage papers 3 days ago. The marriage is scheduled to take place in a month, and the ground just fell out from under Henry's feet. How could it be? And him? Is all lost and there is no possibility and no hope? She won't change her mind and she will never choose him? This is the end. Henry poured himself one glass after another. It seemed to him that he was not getting drunk and that he could not stand on his feet because of the nervous shock. Not the alcohol. He couldn't stand those passionate, shameless kisses of the happy couple in front of everyone. Henry convinced his brother to go home after all. They hailed a cab and went outside to wait for him. It was drizzling with a light rain. Miles opened the car door to avoid standing outside. He and Vivian sat in the back, and Henry said that he would let them kiss and sit in the front. He didn't remember how the keys ended up in his hand. He just got in the driver's seat and started the car. He didn't want to hear voices from the back seat telling him to stop. He just drove wherever he could see, pushing the gas more and more. The car drove obediently through the empty streets of the night. Henry got into his groove, speeding dashingly through dangerous corners. Where in the middle of the night did that bum in the crosswalk come from? Nobody knows, and nobody will ever know. His body flew off like pins from a bowling ball. Henry hit the brakes, and when everything had already happened, he sobered up almost immediately. All three of them jumped out of the car and rushed to the bum's aid. But it was absolutely useless. Even from a distance, it was clear that a living person would not lie in such an unnatural position. Of course, he was no longer breathing. Henry began to cry, howl, whimper, and become hysterical. He realized that he had just crossed out, shattered his entire life, the entire brilliant future of a great scientist. He was only a year away from graduation, and if he went to prison, his whole life would be over. There would be no scientific activity, no great discoveries, and no life. It was unlikely that he would survive prison hell, and Miles protected him as always from prison, from the imminent bullying in prison, from all the horror he had decided to go through himself for his brother. Vivian cried and hugged him, but she dared not dissuade him. Seeing the determination in his eyes, Henry was relieved to agree. He confidently lied during the investigation, spoke at the trial, telling how his brother had decided to take them for a ride through the city and hit a man to death. He said that his brother had arranged the ride in honor of the announcement of his future wedding, so he bragged to his bride. He couldn't even drive himself. He had been drinking to celebrate, and so had his brother, but he decided to take them for a drive. Vivian didn't say anything. She just cried. That's all. She couldn't lie, much less send the man she loved to prison with her lies. And her testimony wasn't needed. Henry's words and his colorful details were enough, and Miles went to jail instead of his brother. Henry had only been to see him once. Miles asked him to come. I mean, Vivian and I never got married, and I think it's for the best. Why would she? A husband for a prisoner? Why would she wait so many years for me? That's not what I want for her, especially now, Miles began. Did something happen? Asked Henry interestedly. Before the trial, she and I were together until they took me away, and now Vivian is pregnant. I don't want to officially marry her, so the baby will be on the son of a criminal. But it's my baby. It'll be your own nephew. I don't even know what's worse for him, growing up without a father or being the son of a prisoner, Miles said. And what can you do? Henry could not understand where his brother was going with this. Not me. You. I've seen how much you like Vivian. Marry her instead of me, so the child can have our last name and a normal father, Miles suggested forcibly to his brother. Henry didn't know what to answer. The proposal was wild, horrible, and very tempting. He continued to walk around Vivian, frequenting her apartment, trying to be supportive, to reassure her, though she was only getting more upset in his presence. Maybe she remembered his testimony in court, but it didn't matter. She didn't persecute him at all. She might get used to it. And the child really needs a father, and Henry is not a stranger to the child, both by blood and family name. But how will I talk her into it? She won't even look at me, replied Henry. Don't worry, I'll persuade her. It's up to you to agree, brother said firmly. Well, you help me out. I can't say no, Henry agreed. He didn't even realize how unequal an exchange, a quid pro quo his brothers voiced. His brother went to jail for him, and he's marrying for his brother the most beautiful and desirable woman he's dreamed of since the first second he saw her? He just takes away his brother's destiny, his life of being free and married to Vivian. She tried not to miss any opportunity to see Miles. She went on every date he was entitled to. He had long persuaded, begged, ordered her to give up the idea of waiting for him, not to cripple their child's life, not to pay his future for his passions. And in the end, he persuaded her. She promised and did. Already in their 7th month of pregnancy, they got married after all. There was no ceremony, no crowd, no champagne. Henry just drank vodka and passed out. On the occasion of the wedding, he went on a week-long binge. Vivian tolerated it. She knew that Henry knew about her dislike for him, about the forced marriage, so he drank. Even though it wasn't really necessary, Henry moved into Vivian's apartment. He rented out his and his brother's apartment. He set up a mini dorm for students, 3 whole rooms. It was a nice extra stipend. Vivian had to take it. She was going to have a baby soon, and she needed the money. Henry hoped that with constant living under one roof, he could convince her, get close to her, become her husband in every way. But at first, the pregnancy got in the way, and after giving birth, Vivian nursed Alex with breast milk for almost a year. All the time she was with her son, as if shielding herself from her husband's harassment. And the worst thing was that she categorically insisted on writing down on the child's birth certificate, not Henry, but Miles as the father. There was a great scandal about it. Despite the marriage certificate, she still managed to do it. So he was only the nominal father and husband to the neighbors, and to the parents, to the kindergarten group, and on the paper, he was not his real father at all, and the child looked nothing like him at all, and neither did the mother. Alex was a carbon copy of his father. He was the same big, dark-haired brunette with piercing blue eyes. Even without papers, people looked at him askance because of his dissimilarity between the child and his nominal father. And to those who saw his papers, the baby's middle name made their family problems even more interesting. Henry was absolutely not happy. It would seem that here was his dream. Take it, use it. His brother was no longer an obstacle. Vivian was even officially his wife, and there was a child to influence her. But for some reason, it doesn't work. Miles has been behind bars for more than a year now. She keeps visiting him, bringing him packages. But why can't she get over him? Why would she want a convicted felon? What will she do with him when he gets out? Or rather, if he gets out? It's not a sanatorium. A lot of people have died there. Why should she wait for him when she has Henry, her lawful husband, whom she married of her own free will? Henry would do anything for her. He was so worried about the first year of their life together. He got drunk after the wedding, and not only then. When she was in labor, he went on a month-long binge, not even home for days at a time. Vivian and the boy checked themselves out and came home in a cab. At home, they were greeted by a terrible mess and signs of a lifelong binge. Henry had become so upset that he had absolutely slipped in his studies and graduated with one of the lowest grades in the history of the department. Now, because of all the family turmoil with someone else's child, Henry was no longer in the spotlight for a vibrant and brilliant academic career. And despite all these sacrifices on his part, they continued to live in separate rooms. She and the baby in a small bedroom, and he in a large, spacious room with a balcony. Friends, almost all of them, had somehow drifted away. Though many of them had young children, and they could have become friends on that basis. But Vivian didn't want to go into the details of Alex's paternity. Many understood the timing of the pregnancy, and without that, the child's bright appearance gave away his real father. But no one spoke to Henry at all after the trial. Everyone knew Miles' principal's nature and his attitude towards drinking and driving. Everyone remembered that Miles had called a cab that ill-fated night. But since Miles didn't object, but only repented and regretted that it had happened that way, so that was it. But why was Vivian silent then? And many people I knew were pretty sure that that wasn't really how it happened, especially the two guys who had seen them get into the car through the window at that time. They couldn't confuse the tall, broad-shouldered Miles kissing Vivian with the skinny Henry. All these suspicions, conclusions, theories, and hypotheses about that creepy incident were keeping Henry awake. And Alex's undocumented appearance brought all the friends back to the subject of Miles and worldly injustice. And Henry couldn't stand it. He went on a binge, and once he raised his hands to Vivian, then, when he sobered up, he saw the bruises on her face and couldn't understand where they came from. The memory came back, and he remembered that unexpectedly pleasant feeling when he gave vent to all his negativity. All his resentment against life and even his former jealousy. Vivian forgave him and didn't kick him out after that first time. But it wasn't long before, during another binge, he raised his hand on his wife again, in front of Alex. Vivian had to stay home because of the bruises, and the child was crying. He could have blabbed in the kindergarten, and his wife's bruises were living proof of that. Since then, Henry has tried not to drink as much. He knew he was bound to snap. In that state, he didn't know where his fist flew. In the face or in the head, in the arms or in the back. He just hit her and got a strange, perverse sense of satisfaction out of it. He was no longer seeking intimacy with Vivian. He just beat her for refusing to be with him, for disliking him, for the painful jealousy that never went away. After all, he knows she keeps seeing Miles. Not often, but still. Henry got up from the bench and wandered home. He decided to drink the second bottle at home. Vivian knew from the doorstep that he was drunk again today. Though not as usual, without the usual vodka, just beer. And he only glanced at the boy who had snuck into his room out of his sight. And again the drunken thoughts of his brother swirled in his inebriated brain. "What are you looking at? Where's dinner?" he tossed to his silent wife. "You shouldn't have been drinking tonight. I wanted to talk to you seriously," Vivian began. "None of your business. I want and I drink. I have the right to rest and celebrate. Or have you forgotten what day it is? No? I can see it in your eyes. You're thinking of him, aren't you? You must be going to see him again," said Henry angrily. "Henry, I didn't want to talk about Miles. I wanted to talk about you and me." Vivian tried again to make conversation. "About you and me? How you put it? Where are you and me?" the man wondered. "Exactly. You're right.
There never was, never can be, and never will be. So maybe we shouldn't torture each other. Neither you, nor I, nor Alex are made happier by this life. Miles wanted to do what's best for all of us then, but it's been long clear that what's best for all of us is if we part ways, the woman said quietly.
Oh, let's break up. You mean you want us to separate? Yes? Just like that? You want me to pack up my stuff and get out of your apartment? Asked Henry indignantly.
Not from the apartment, but from my life. It's for you first and foremost. You're not happy with us, I can tell. That's why you drink all the time, Vivian said confidently.
Henry stood and thought, picked up his suitcase, and mechanically started packing, took the ironed shirts, suits, and jackets off the rack, and went to the bedroom to get a razor and a toothbrush, buttoned the suitcase and carried it to the door, went out to the kitchen to get matches for his cigarettes for the trip, and he noticed his bottle of beer on the kitchen table and a large homemade cake, Napoleon, Miles's favorite cake. Henry opened the bottle and began to drink it. He looked at this cake with such love. The unfinished bottle flew into the wall by the window. Vivian went into the kitchen to see what was going on, and she came across Henry's angry face. She had never seen so much anger in him before, and that anger spilled out with the first punch, and then another and another. He grabbed her by her golden hair, which he'd always wanted to touch gently, stroke, but now he just grabbed it, caught her running down the corridor, and slammed her head sharply against the wall again and again. She stopped struggling, and he continued his dirty work, only now with his hands free of her hair. She collapsed on the floor, and he started kicking her with his shoes. He never took his shoes off as he came in from the street. Only tired and out of breath did he stop. He looked at the suitcase, took it, and went out. If he was not welcome here, there was nothing for him to do here. He has his own apartment, or rather, Miles. But that doesn't matter. He can be discharged anyway. He's got years to go. Henry can have the apartment transferred to himself. Miles is waiting elsewhere anyway. Henry walked down the street. The heavy suitcase occasionally tipped him on the side, but Henry continually steadfastly stuck to his route. On the way, Henry began to ventilate a little, and into his brother's apartment he came almost sober. There was no one in the center room. The tenants had gone somewhere. They had warned that they would be gone for 2 weeks. Henry collapsed on the couch without undressing, only taking off his bloody shoes. At night, in a drunken dream, he dreamt of Miles. He looked at his brother with such reproach, and then dreamed that Vivian was a doll and he was playing with her, spreading her arms and legs so that she was a beautiful pose. She was soft and pliable, and instead of eyes, she had black spots, as if there were no eyes at all. Henry woke up in a cold sweat. The dream about Vivian, cotton doll, somehow strangely echoed his real sensations of yesterday. His memory began to return. Henry remembered that his wife had been, at one point yesterday, the same kind of wimpy doll. There in the hallway as he was beating her and she was lying on the floor and not resisting. Henry sat down on the couch and started rubbing his face with his hands to wake up faster, to sober up, to make sure none of this was true. But the stains of dried blood on his shoes and the sleeves of his clothes told him that this was no dream, no fantasy, no nightmare, but reality. Henry clutched his head. He remembered everything. He sat for a while longer, got up slowly, picked up his suitcase, and left the apartment. He walked his way back the way that he had walked the day before, and was also carrying the suitcase, only swinging less and moving smoother and faster. While still in the courtyard, he noticed an ambulance near his front doorway. He approached cautiously, but saw no one, only the chauffeur. Henry walked closer to him and, with a completely indifferent look, wondered who the MTs were after. "Yes, the grandmother alone got sick. They're going to put her on a stretcher and carry her out. Take her to..." The driver replied indifferently, wiping the windshield with a rag.
Henry calmed down and went upstairs. He only calmed down on the outside, though. Inside, his heart was pounding so hard it could have popped. He reassured himself that everything was okay. The door to the apartment was open, not wide, but only a crack, ajar. Henry peered into the hallway. No one was there, only traces of yesterday's blood on the wall and on the floor and in the hallway, where Vivian had been lying. She herself was nowhere to be seen. Henry felt hungry and went into the kitchen. What he saw there stunned him to the point where he couldn't get a word out first. At the table, over an uncut cake, sat his brother. Miles was looking directly at Henry, and from the eyes of this mature male, hardened by prison life, Henry knew that his brother knew all about Vivian's beating, and maybe not just about last night. There was a sound behind him. There were policemen standing in the hallway. They had just come back from the driveway, walking around, interviewing the neighbors, and they told me what a great mother Vivian was, that they had known her since she was a little girl, and how her nightmare had started when her husband arrived, and about his constant drinking and beating. People can see and hear everything. The bruises on Vivian's face and body, the crying of a child during Henry's drunken screams. The police looked at Henry, at his wrinkled appearance, at the suitcase in his hand, and at the blood on his shoes, which he did not even think to wipe off. There was plenty of evidence without the witness's testimony. "You want to know where the woman you beat up here was yesterday in front of her kid is?" His brother's stern voice clarified behind him. Henry hurriedly drew closer to the police. He suddenly realized that he was going to jail, and that he was facing prison, and that prison might be his salvation. As soon as Henry was led out of the apartment in handcuffs, Miles rushed to the hospital to see his beloved. They wouldn't let him in at first, but then they let him see her. Vivian had just regained consciousness. "Miles!" She recognized him and began to cry, holding out her hand to him. He came over, knelt by the bed, and began kissing her fingers under the bandages. "Where's Alex? Where is he? What's wrong with him?" the woman continued. "It's okay. He's at your friend's on the first floor. She'll look after him. Don't worry, it's okay. I'll never let you and Alex go again. I'll always be there for you," the man said, barely holding back tears. The woman took his hand in her palm and said quietly, "I know, my love. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. Happy birthday."